Studies Group, U.S. Naval War College. We then had Bob McConnell of the Washington-based U.S.-Ukraine Foundation and former presidential appointee of the Department of Justice, followed this past week, by Dr. Andrei Kortunov, Director General of the Moscow-based Russian International Affairs Council, that's the RIAC, a part of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Russian Federation. Well, tonight we continue coverage on the crisis, but we're going to be looking more at the humanitarian aspect of this crisis. We have as our guest this evening, Andrew Fedynsky, Director of the Cleveland-based Ukrainian Museum Archives and President of North Shore Consultants, a Cleveland-based management consulting company, consulting to firms specializing in government private sector relations. We're going to be discussing the deepening humanitarian crisis caused by the Russian invasion of the sovereign country of Ukraine and local relief efforts. And I emphasize the sovereign country of Ukraine. Let's set the stage for tonight's discussion. So as we all know, February 2014, Russia invaded Ukraine. They seized the Crimea region and subsequently annexed it into Russia in what Russian President Putin justified as necessary because, as I quote, the Russian-speaking population in Crimea was threatened and that the threats were absolutely specific and tangible, end quote. What he's really referring to was the ouster of then pro-Russian Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych. He then again used the same language in speaking about southern and eastern Ukraine. And Putin said, and I quote again, the essential issue is how to ensure the legitimate rights and interests of ethnic Russians and Russian speakers in the southeast of Ukraine, end quote. Well, he used similar language when attacking Chechnya and Georgia, both also former Soviet republics. Sadly, again, as we know, on February 24th, Russia initiated an invasion of Ukraine, announcing a special military operation to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine and protect Russian Jews living in Ukraine, forgetting, possibly conveniently, that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is himself Jewish. Putin launched an all-out invasion of the country, ruthlessly attacking major cities, occupying and reducing major infrastructure to rubble, and even resorting to attacking civilian targets, including hospitals, apartment complexes, railway stations teeming with civilians seeking nothing but a means of escape. He's attacked a major Ukrainian theater house, trapping hundreds and who simply sought shelter from Russia's ruthless attacks on civilians. Thousands of Ukrainian citizens have been injured and thousands more have perished at the indiscriminate violence perpetrated on them by the Russians. The reports are now coming in of Russian troops not only killing civilians, but also looting stores and private homes in occupied areas. And recent reports have also indicated Russian troops raping Ukrainian women. Well, this is very reminiscent of Russian troops' behavior in World War II when they entered Germany and other occupied areas that became the Soviet bloc countries. Report of indiscriminate violence perpetrated on innocent civilians by then Russian troops as well. Then two, Putin has threatened nuclear war by saying he would attack any country interfering with Russia with, quote, devastation they have never seen before, including attacking any country seeking to enforce a no-fly zone over Ukraine. Since the invasion began, approaching over a month now, the Ukrainian military has put up valiant and heroic resistance. President Zelensky has heroically remained in Ukraine despite the threat of assassination by Russian special forces, motivating his people to resist by whatever means necessary. But then this crisis has caused a mass refugee crisis of a reported 3.8 million Ukrainians as of this evening, a refugee crisis not seen since World War II, when Europeans, including Russian civilians, fled the Nazis. That's 3.8 million civilians, or 9% of Ukraine's population, forced to flee their country and their homes by the Russians, who allegedly came as liberators, according to Putin's logic. But then again, Putin is no longer capable of logic, let alone humane thoughts and actions. Luckily, European countries such as Germany, France, Poland, and others have opened their borders to these refugees, as has the United States, in massive humanitarian relief efforts. Then just last week, Russia passed stringent laws further restricting the media by criminalizing so-called fake news. But who's to determine what news is fake and what isn't, as that's not been made clear? But what is abundantly clear is that Putin will now have the leverage to prosecute anyone reporting news that is not favorable to Putin himself or to Russia. A free people are only as strong as freedom of the press, which represents the people. Sadly, a free people and freedom of the press are no longer existent in Putin's Russia, and he's now crossed the line to become a dictator. So some very real questions remain, and I'll just touch on a few this evening. What is Putin's endgame in Ukraine and with its citizens? Given the violence that Russia has visited on the civilian population in Ukraine, has Putin become a war criminal by attacking and killing innocent civilians as the West is now posturing? Well, personally, I would submit that he has become a war criminal. But how does one deal with a power-hungry madman who's eliminated past enemies and has his hands on nuclear weapons? What's happening on the ground in Russia with respect to this current crisis? Well, these and many more questions remain, but again, there's not enough time for tonight's to address these questions on tonight's program. But let's turn to our guest to discuss the humanitarian crisis and related issues. Andrew Fedynsky is president of Cleveland, Ohio-based North Shore Consultants, a management consulting firm specializing in government private sector relations. He's also director of the Cleveland-based Ukrainian Museum Archives. The Ukrainian Museum Archives was founded in 1952 by displaced scholars who took on the mission of collecting and preserving items from Ukrainian history and culture during an era when this kind of material was being deliberately destroyed by then Soviet Ukraine. In 1991, with the breakup of the Soviet Union and the independence of Ukraine, the UMA's collection began to attract attention from other institutions, including the Library of Congress, the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, Ohio State University Slavic Studies Department, and the Academy of Sciences of Ukraine. In 1998, the government of Ukraine requested that the UMA prepare a pilot project that has been incorporated into the U.S.-Ukraine agreement on the protection and preservation of cultural heritage. Well, prior to, Andrew served in Washington as a legislative assistant to several members of Congress. Andy, welcome to the program Going Global with David Delgado.
Thank you, David. And you know, my reaction when you talked about the free press and the Russian censorship of free speech, I salute you and thousands and thousands and thousands of Americans who are examining issues across the board, and now obviously with this horrible situation in Ukraine, which is impacting not only Europe and America, but the entire world. So congratulations to you.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Thank you. This situation in Ukraine is abominable. It is something that we have not seen since Nazi Germany embarked on their campaign in the 1930s, and we all know the end result of that. Totally abominable. Let's turn to the Ukraine Museum Archives and tell us a little bit about that. Who are its members? Tell us about the museum itself.
Well, you mentioned refugees. You know, I'm a refugee myself. I was born in Innsbruck, Austria, right after World War II. My father was a political prisoner. We came to America when I was 8 months old, and Ukraine was embroiled then in a war of liberation against the Soviet Union. And as you mentioned, it was during a time when Stalin and the Soviet Union were deliberately destroying Ukrainian culture, but also other cultures. The Baltic states, Jewish, they were dominating Poland, and displaced scholars made it their mission to preserve that which was being destroyed. And we in Cleveland ended up with a vast collection of historical documents, periodicals, postcards, you name it, photographs that were preserved in a museum in the Tremont neighborhood where we still are. And as you mentioned, it was not that interesting until Ukraine became independent after the breakup of the Soviet Union. And I remember, David, how soon after Ukraine became independent, a scholar, an editor of a Ukrainian literary magazine, came to Cleveland and paid a courtesy visit to the Ukrainian Museum in Tremont and was just floored, flabbergasted. He said, "You have stuff here that nobody else has in the world." And it was because of the leader, the founder of the Ukrainian Museum Archives, Leonid Fedynsky, who was a scholar in the old country and was plugged into a network of similar scholars and displaced diplomats. And as these folks started aging, he said, "Send all your stuff to Cleveland." And so we ended up with this. And so this literary editor, he said, "Look, the time will come when the Ukrainian government says, send all this stuff to Ukraine, to Kyiv." And he said, "You don't dare do this for at least 2 generations to make sure that Ukrainian independence is for real and enduring." He said in the 20s, the same thing happened where people were sending precious documents to Ukraine. And then in the 30s, Stalin was destroying those. And with the invasion of Ukraine 5 weeks ago, I had occasion to remember the words of this editor and seeing how Russia, how Putin is shelling cultural cities and so on. I thought, what a prophetic warning. Preserve those here. And so here we are in Cleveland, working with institutions like Ohio State University, University of Notre Dame, the archives, Central Archives in Ukraine. So we feel that we have an important mission, and just we're gratified by the outpouring of support from people, so many who are not of Ukrainian heritage, but who value what we're doing and understand the stake that this crisis conflict has for America, for the world.
You know, I would second what you said regarding the impact that this crisis is having, not only in Ukraine, but to the world as well. And again, from a humanitarian perspective, which is what we're going to be further discussing this evening, you touched a little bit about the devastation in Ukraine, and the fact that the remarks of one of your founding members was quite prophetic. I too have been to Ukraine, and I am very saddened to see the destruction that is being levied on the country. Monuments that are being destroyed, old buildings, antiquities that are being destroyed by the indiscriminate shelling, the opera house in Mariupol that was destroyed, and on and on and on, and just the devastation that's being levied on Kiev itself. I remember the magnificent cathedrals there, the magnificent churches that I saw there, that many now are destroyed and are never going to be replaced. Thousand-year-old structures. Exactly. And when I've seen photos of the devastation, I am just saddened by what I knew when I visited Ukraine, and I visited Ukraine more than once. And this is going back at least 10 years when I was last there. A very modern city, sure, a blend of antiquities and modernness, but nonetheless a bustling modern city. And now the devastation that's been levied on it. But back to the Ukraine Museum very quickly, and then we'll move on from there. Who are the members of this museum? Is it private individuals, corporate membership, and how's it funded?
Well, the Ukrainian Museum Archives is a 501c3, which means it's a nonprofit institution. So those who contribute to the museum are entitled to a tax deduction. We have membership, so people who value Ukrainian culture, and they're not just Ukrainian Americans, who send in their checks, and we accept checks from $25 to 25,000 to support our operations. And we also are supported by foundations, Cuyahoga Arts and Culture, which is funded, which is a nonprofit. They provide an annual stipend. We got support from Ohio State University Slavic Study. So, and of course the community, and people leave money in their wills for us, and then, you know, people who just come in and drop, you know, $5, $10 in the contribution box. We have an annual fundraiser, the Easter Bazaar. We just had that this past weekend, and we're going to do that again this coming weekend, Saturday and Sunday, at St. Pokrova Ukrainian Catholic Church in Parma on Broadview Road. So, and then of course we have any number of volunteers. So we've been at this for 70 years now, and we're confident we're going to continue.
So Ukraine does have, Cleveland does have a substantial Ukrainian population. As you know better than I.
Sure.
What do you hear from the membership of the, or should I say the diaspora, the Ukrainian diaspora that is happening in Ukraine now? Do you get personal stories? You get personal vignettes as to what's going on there?
Lots. I mean, I have my own family in Ukraine, friends, and then people who are used to travel back and forth to visit family, and family visited here. What's happening now is that there's a massive campaign to raise money to support Ukraine, but also medical equipment. There's a group called Cleveland Maidan Association. These are largely people who have come to America in the last 25 years or so, who've been assembling medical equipment, as I mentioned, humanitarian aid, money, but also Global Cleveland, for example. That's or the leader is the president is Joe Simperman, former councilman.
By the way, I invited Joe Simperman to appear on this program this evening, but never heard back from him. So I don't know what that's about. But I never.
Well, I tell you what it's about. He's up to his eyeballs in requests and so on. He's working very hard. But,
I bet he is. We're going to have
Catholic.
to
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
We're going to have to take a quick break right now, Andy. But I do want to come back and pick up where we left off, and that is what you're hearing is going on in Ukraine from the diaspora here, and also talk about the Cleveland Maidan Association. You're listening to Going Global with David Delgado, and we have on the air with us tonight Andrew Fedynsky, director of the Cleveland-based Ukrainian Museum Archives and president of North Shore Consultants here in Cleveland. And we're discussing the deepening crisis caused by the Russian invasion of the sovereign country of Ukraine and local relief efforts. Tonight's program is brought to you by the Adams County Board, the Adams Board of Cuyahoga County, Margaret Wong Associates, Cleveland-based award-winning immigration attorneys. You can reach them at imwong.com. That's imwong.com. We're going to be taking a short break. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
We are Voice It Radio, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on voiceitradio.com.
Hello, this is Larry H. Gardner, host of Headlines and Headaches on voiceitradio.com. Fentanyl is the leader. Cocaine, meth, and heroin. Any drug may contain fentanyl. If you use drugs, never use alone, and carry Narcan in case of overdose. Call the Adams Board 24-hour addiction line and mental health crisis hotline at area code 216-623-6888. That's 216-623-6888 if you are ready for help.
Hi, this is Queen Elder Jacqueline Swells Goodrum. Tune in to Daughters of the Nile every Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. at voiceitradio.com.
Don't you dare touch that mouse. You're tuning in to the world's #1 internet radio station. We're talking about Voice It Radio, baby. Don't touch that mouse. I dare you to touch that mouse. Don't touch that mouse.
Eat 'em up, 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 eat 'em up.
Whether you're a Clevelander by birth or choice, sizzle on down to Ohio City Barbecue and taste our award-winning ribs, pulled pork, and tender brisket, located at 3829 Lorraine Avenue, Cleveland, Ohio. For all your barbecue needs, catering, or delivery, give us a call at 216-417-5987.
Tastes so good, make you want to slap your mama.
Hey, what's happening? It's your boy EP, the show host, and you are tuned into the #1 internet station in all the land, voiceitradio.com.
Join yours truly, Harvey Zay, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern. We will talk jazz, have interviews with special guests, and spin some of the greatest jazz tunes from past and present. It's Harvey Zay's Jazz Room from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on voiceitradio.com.
Margaret W. Wong is a leading immigration lawyer in Cleveland, Ohio, and 8 other cities. Practicing immigration law for more than 45 years, Margaret W. Wong is recognized by U.S. News Best Law Firms, Super Lawyers, and is rated AV Preeminent. Margaret W. Wong consults with you at her office or on the phone. For all your immigration needs, email info@imwong.com. That's info@imwong.com, or call 216-566-9908. That's 216-566-9908.
Hi, I'm Lillian Piles.
And I'm Harry Boomer.
Join us every Thursday from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We will be covering all aspects of theater, film, and the performing arts right here from Northeast Ohio.
We will also tell you about what national major productions are coming to town. Don't miss Backstage with Lillian Piles and Harry Boomer every Thursday from 7 to 8 p.m. right here on voiceitradio.com.
We are Voice It Radio, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on voiceitradio.com.
David, I hope I'm not out of line.
Welcome to Going Global with David Delgado. We're talking to Andrew Fedynsky, director of the Cleveland-based Ukrainian Museum Archives and president of North Shore Consultants, and we're discussing the deepening humanitarian crisis caused by Russian invasion of the sovereign country of Ukraine, and we're going to be talking about local relief efforts. No, Andy, to your comment, you are not out of line at all. This is a radio program. We're talking freedom of the press. Now, as long as you don't slap me in the face, we're good.
Well, what I want to say is I heard the commercials, and I just want to say that Margaret Wong and her company have been supporters of the Ukrainian Museum Archives for many years. So we appreciate that, and others.
I'm glad to hear that. Margaret is a very kind-hearted woman. She has a heart of gold.
Yes, she does.
Her law firm does represent individuals with immigration issues. And I can't say enough about Margaret. I've known her for a number of years. I've known her staff for a number of years. We've appeared as speakers at various events, and she also has supported the organization that I'm a member of, which is the ICC-WIN, International Cross-Cultural World Independent Network. So I cannot say enough about Margaret. Once again, anyone wanting information, look at her website, imwong.com. That's imwong.com. So I'm glad to hear that, Tom. So before we went on break, we were talking about what are you hearing from the Ukrainian diaspora here in Cleveland? I have to imagine you're getting some firsthand reports, and you mentioned you've been in contact as well yourself. What are you hearing is going on in the bigger cities, particularly Kiev, Mariupol, Lviv, that kind of thing? What do you get?
Well, obviously, I'm hearing what's on the national news. But also from individuals, some of them in tears, many of them in tears, who have either elderly relatives in Ukraine, mothers, grandmothers, or young kids, and there's millions of refugees, unfortunately, sadly, and
1.8 million and growing.
yes, and each is an individual story. You know, I mean, millions are a statistic, but if that's your grandmother or your niece or whatever, then it's personal, and we're working not just individually, and we can't accommodate the flood of individuals, but we can refer them to organizations like Global Cleveland. I know that Governor DeWine had a what he called a refugee summit about a week and a half ago at St. Vladimir's Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and has mobilized his agencies to put the resources of the state of Ohio to this problem. And among those were, as I mentioned, Joe Simperman and Global Cleveland, but also Cleveland Catholic Charities. There's an organization in New York called Razum, Together. So there are any number of organizations, the Ukrainian Red Cross, UNICEF, the United Nations Refugee Relief Organization, who have mobilized on a very short notice. And I know that President Biden saluted the people and the government of Poland, who have taken in 2 million refugees over the course of a week or two, and are, giving them shelter, food, and now enrolling children in schools. It's absolutely staggering. And so we read about and we see the destruction, the horrific death toll, but we also need to salute and recognize and admire the global outreach of people who are helping, and we're starting to hear from people in the greater Cleveland area who are saying, I have a spare bedroom. I have, my kids are grown up. I have three bedrooms. We're able to accommodate whatever refugees come. And I know from people that I've been talking to that Ukrainian refugees expect and pray and hope that their status is temporary, that they'll be able to come back and go back to their homes. And then the war will shift, not from war, but to rehabilitation, to reconstruction of Ukraine. And I know from history that Ukraine was utterly destroyed after World War II. So was Germany, so were other countries. And within a generation, they came into prosperity. And I trust, I believe that one, Ukraine will prevail in this war. And then when that happens, that people will be going back to their homes. And then we, the Western world, the civilized world, not just the West, Japan, and so on, will contribute to reconstructing and bringing about a better world. I mean, that's what we're all about.
Well, that is what we're all about. But digressing a bit to the refugee crisis, reports are coming in, and just as recently as an hour ago on mainstream media, that continued violence. Again, there's continued violence against citizens. There's reports of a 2-year-old boy. There are reports of a 2-year-old boy who was killed in his bed because of the shelling. There are reports of a individual seeking to leave with his family, his wife and 6-year-old son, and someone else. They were part of a column. They were shot at by, the column was shot at by Russian soldiers. In fact, the husband, the gentleman I'm referring to, got out of his car with his hands up. It's on video. He's approaching Russian soldiers, and the next thing is he's laying on the ground dead. His wife was killed. His 6-year-old son lived, as did the person in the back seat. These are reports that are coming in, and there's just no stop to them. They're coming in. Now, you mentioned that Clevelanders are opening their homes and offering their third or fourth bedroom to Ukrainian refugees. What role is Cleveland playing in relocating Cleveland refugees?
Well, I would say that the lead is Global Cleveland, and they took it on themselves and have been providing really valuable services in dealing with Afghani refugees, and obviously that's a big problem. And now they've been gearing up to deal with what is expected to be several thousand Ukrainian refugees. And I know that there's a good many Ukrainian American families in Cleveland, Parma, other suburbs, who are welcoming relatives or friends of relatives. But there's also people who are just, have big hearts, who are lining up. And I know, from my own personal experience, as I said, I'm a refugee. And when my parents came to Cleveland in the 1950s, there was an already established Ukrainian American community in Tremont that had come, their ancestors came in the late 19th, early 20th century, who opened their hearts and helped us get settled. And now it's our turn. And this tragically is not something new for America. And it's not something new for Ukrainians. There are so many groups from Central and Eastern Europe that have done the same, whether they're Lithuanians, Poles, or whatever. And I might also add that you also had Americans, African Americans from the South coming to Cleveland for jobs who had family. And so part of America's legacy and history is the generosity of our people to those who are seeking employment, freedom, opportunity. And that's what's happening now. And it's gratifying to see. It's sad that it has to happen, but we're a generous nation. Despite all our divisions, we are a good people.
Andy, and no doubt, I agree with you there. Having said that, there are those that are saying that we cannot be the world's policeman. We cannot be the world's breadbasket. We cannot receive every single refugee that is undergoing hardships. How would you respond to that?
Well, it's true. But if you look at history, we sat out the First World War, and then eventually got into it. And I don't know how many 100,000 Americans died in the First World War. And then there was a wave of immigration afterwards. And the people who came in that wave worked in the factories and became professionals, whether they were physicians or whether they were steel workers. After World War II, the United States took in several million refugees, But we also shouldn't forget that the United States had to integrate 10 million GIs. And so what did we do? Sent the GIs to school with the GI Bill, built houses all around Cleveland and elsewhere in America in the GI Bill. And America has prospered as a result. So sure, we can't be the world's policeman, but we also, when we turn our backs or tend to ignore what's happening, whether it was World War I or World War II when Hitler and Stalin invaded, we ended up deeply involved in World War II with hundreds of thousands of Americans dying. But after the war, the United States organized its allies, including defeated countries like Japan and Germany, with the Marshall Plan to rebuild these countries, with the World Bank, with the International Monetary System, with the United Nations, with NATO. And that sustained peace for 3 generations. And we all benefited from that, including this refugee right here. And now we're confronted with a similar challenge. And the sad part of it is that Putin is not only destroying Ukraine and assaulting Ukrainians, but also Russians. I mean, what do Ukrainians want? They want freedom, democracy, civil society, and prosperity. What do Russians want? The same thing. And Putin doesn't want them to have it. One person, and he's managed to somehow get his country, his nation, to support his lunacy. And the result is thousands of deaths and deprivation for the country of Russia.
I don't know that it's that he doesn't want them to have it. I think it's more a matter of perception in terms of how he sees Russia achieving those very things you discussed. And therein lies the difference. We're looking at it, we being the West, are looking at it from the perspective of economic alliances, economic growth, global alliances, all economically based. Putin, on the other hand, seems to be looking at the growth of Russia from a military perspective. Well,
I think you're right.
Unfortunately, he has disregarded the advice of some of his key advisors, and specifically the Russian International Affairs Council, Andrei Kortunov, whom we had on the program last week. And Andrei, to his credit, had the courage to appear on this program. Moscow-based Andrei Kortunov appeared on this program last week to discuss the Russian-Ukraine crisis, and he was taking the middle of the road. We tried not to put him on the spot because we're aware of the recent laws that Russia enacted regarding treason and the harsh penalties he could face. But basically what he said was he's disagreeing with Putin and this military action. In their own publication, they published that the only way Russia is going to advance is to engage in economic alliances. Although they did counsel that Russia would not tolerate being surrounded by NATO countries, meaning NATO military equipment, NATO missiles, Russia would not tolerate that. But they did counsel economic engagement. And Russia, unfortunately, has not done that. Russia has turned into a corrupt state, which is essentially now a communist state. Putin now is a dictator. He's operating as a sole and exclusive dictator without the Duma, without his military advisors. And here we are, basically, he's got his back against the wall. And what I'm saying is beware of the cornered badger, because that cornered badger could come out with devastating consequences. And then the other points that you articulated, all the more reason why Global Cleveland should come on the program to discuss relief efforts, to discuss Ukrainian seeking entry into the United States and what Cleveland is doing, because Cleveland does have probably the largest diaspora of Ukrainians in the United States. So I think very important to get the word out. You talked about earlier the Cleveland Maidan Association. I wonder if you can tell us about that.
Well, the Maidan, that was about 8 years ago, when the corrupt pro-Russian president of Ukraine rejected the popular, and actually what he had promised, orientation of Ukraine on Europe. And that's been a long-standing aspiration of Ukrainians. And so Ukrainians came out in large numbers to protest that. It culminated in a massacre where government snipers, government militias killed over 100 people to put down the protests. And then Yanukovych, the president, fled, and he's now in exile in Russia. In Cleveland, the more recent immigrants organized themselves to support their family members during this crisis. And they soon after the government repression and murder of people, Putin ordered his military to invade Crimea and then the East. So the Maidan Association, they started supporting the resistance to Russia. Now, you need to keep in mind that President Yanukovych pretty much dismantled the American military, the Ukrainian military. So when Putin invaded Crimea, Ukraine didn't have an army, basically, and then invaded the East. And so there were self-organized militia groups that fought the Russians, and then the Ukrainian government that was elected after Yanukovych fled started building a military with the obvious support of the United States. Maidan here in Cleveland, they started organizing assistance to these groups that were resisting Ukraine. And in fact, Maidan here in Cleveland, they bought and then arranged the shipment of 10 ambulances through a port in Poland, Gdansk, and then shipped those to the East. They organized all sorts of other assistance, and now they're doing the same. St. Pokrova Church on Broadview Road is accepting various relief packages, and this is happening all around. My daughter lives in the Washington area. 2 days ago, she personally, along with dozens of other people, but she personally packed 900 boxes of medical supplies to Ukrainians, whether they were bandages, Tylenol, etc. So what Cleveland Maidan is doing here is being replicated throughout the United States, Canada, Europe. And so Maidan is one of the premier organizations, but so is fund to aid Ukraine with the United Ukrainian Organizations of Ohio. They're raising money, etc. So
I'm going to ask
there's an
you,
outpouring.
before the program ends, I'm going to ask you for the names of some organizations that listeners can donate to if they choose. We're going to be taking a quick break, but I do want to ask you this one question before we break. Do you think Putin is a war criminal?
Yes.
Is that a yes that I
Yes, he is. Of course.
Very good. So we are going to be taking a quick break. You're listening to Going Global with David Delgado. We have with us this evening Andrew Fedynsky, director of the Cleveland-based Ukrainian Museum Archives and president of North Shore Consultants. And we're discussing the humanitarian crisis caused by the Russian invasion of the sovereign, and I want to stress sovereign country of Ukraine, and local relief efforts. Stay with us. We'll be right back after this break.
Hi, I'm Lillian Piles.
And I'm Harry Boomer.
Join us every Thursday from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We will be covering all aspects of theater, film, and the performing arts right here from Northeast Ohio.
We will also tell you about what national major productions are coming to town. Don't miss Backstage with Lillian Piles and Harry Boomer every Thursday from 7 to 8 p.m. right here on VoiceItRadio.com.
Margaret W. Wong is a leading immigration lawyer in Cleveland, Ohio, and 8 other cities. Practicing immigration law for more than 45 years, Margaret W. Wong is recognized by U.S. News Best Law Firms, Super Lawyers, and is rated AV Preeminent. Margaret W. Wong consults with you at her office or on the phone. For all your immigration needs, email info@imwong.com. That's info@imwong.com, or call 216-566 9908. That's 216-566-9908.
Hello, this
We are Voice of Radio, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on voiceofradio.com.
Welcome back to Going Global with David Delgado. We're talking to Andrew Fedynsky, Director of Cleveland-based Ukrainian Museum Archives and President of North Shore Consultants. And we're discussing the deepening humanitarian crisis caused by the Russian invasion of the sovereign, and I want to say sovereign once again, I want to stress that, country of Ukraine, and local relief efforts. Andy, we're starting to run short on time. We've got just a few minutes. I do want to ask you about organizations that listeners can donate to as they choose. Before we get to that, though, I just want to touch on a couple of other questions. Recently, President Biden made a comment. It was an off-the-cuff comment that Putin has to go. Now, he wasn't articulating, according to him, national foreign policy by saying Putin has to go, but that obviously was not received well by the Kremlin. As a matter of fact, it was received as a threat. How do you feel about those comments, you personally?
Well, personally, I agree with that. I was listening to one of the national news programs this morning, and the former president of Ukraine, Viktor Yushchenko, he's the guy who was poisoned when he was running for president. His comment was, "What took so long? Of course he needs to go." And he is a war criminal. He's a war criminal for starting the war in the first place. Ukraine is a sovereign and democratic, freedom-loving country. Why invade? And of course, now that he's invaded, bombing maternity hospitals, kindergartens, churches. I mean, good Lord, that's going back to the age of Hitler.
Of course, he has to go. Let me interrupt you a second there. He does have to go, and I apologize for interrupting. We're starting to run short on time.
Oh, sure.
Of course, he does have to go. I don't disagree with that. However, here's an individual who has his finger on the nuclear trigger. Here's an individual who has his back to the wall. Here's an individual who thought he could take over Ukraine in 3 or 4 days, and here we are approaching 5 weeks out, and he is stalled. Here's an individual who's going to be facing guerrilla warfare, and his troops are going to be facing guerrilla warfare ad infinitum. With his back to the wall and his finger on the nuclear trigger, obviously the fear is that he could resort to the use of tactical nuclear weapons. He resorts to tactical nuclear weapons. It is a very short hop to strategic nuclear weapons, and then the end of the world as we know it today. And that is a very real possibility. That is not an exaggeration. That is not a pipe dream. That is not exaggeration. That is a very real possibility. Our guest last week indicated that change has to come to Russia. Now, was he intimating that Putin has to go? In my opinion, well, I won't give an opinion on that. He did say change has to come to Russia. He said, but that change has to come from within, not without. It has to come from within. I would almost agree with that if sustained change is going to come to Russia, it has to come from within and not without. Now, people can read into that what they choose, but in fact, I totally believe that it has to come from the outside. If it comes from within, rather, if it comes from the outside, we're setting a very dangerous precedent. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think President Biden was articulating his personal outrage, having met with refugees and seen what's been going on. And his message was from the heart, but I also think it was a message to the Russian people. And I agree, it has to come from within. We can't go in with the 82nd Airborne and depose him. That ain't going to happen. But at the same time, the fear of nuclear warfare does not mean that you give Putin everything he wants, anything he wants. And you know, this is a time as not just President Biden has articulated, but all our NATO allies and people from outside of NATO, whether it's Australia or Japan, they agree. We have to stop this. And to give in means the end of the world as we know it anyway. Not physically destroyed, but politically, diplomatically, economically. So this is a time for the world, for the free world, to stand up.
No doubt, it is a time for the free world to stand up. Just a couple of more questions, very quickly. Donations. What organizations would you advocate listeners donate to? And then if you can give a guess as to the number of refugees Cleveland can welcome.
Okay, I would think Cleveland can welcome 3,000 to 5,000 refugees. The organizations that I would recommend contributing to, we've mentioned Cleveland Maidan, and you can Google them.
Maidan is M-A-I-D-A-N, correct?
Yes.
Cleveland Maidan, M-A-I-D-A-N.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes. Fund to Aid Ukraine, that's the United Ukrainian Organizations of Ohio. Global Cleveland, Catholic Charities, Ukrainian Red Cross, and there's a group, there's an organization, I believe they're in New York, they're very, very good, called Razom, R-A-Z-O-M. And you'll have to Google that, I think it's .org. They're very efficient and cost effective. And what's important is that you contribute not only to good organizations, but to those that have the means to ship the aid to Ukraine, to where it does the best, where it makes a difference.
Also, I have been advised that CNN.com/impact is also where to make donations for the Ukrainian relief effort. That is CNN.com/impact. One last question, Andrew.
I would add UNICEF as well.
Okay. One last question. People wanting to contact you, how can they do that? You or your organization, or you as president of the North Shore Consultants, how can they contact you?
Well, they can email me at the Ukrainian Museum Archives. It's staff, S-T-A-F-F, at umacleveland.org.
That's staff.
Staff at umacleveland.org.
Got it. Staff at umacleveland.org. I want to thank Andrew Fedynsky, Director of Cleveland-based Ukrainian Museum Archives and President of North Shore Consultants, a management consulting firm in specializing in government private sector relations, for appearing on tonight's program. Tonight's program has been brought to you by the Adams County Board of Cuyahoga County, that is. I'll get that straight. And Margaret Wong Associates, Cleveland-based award-winning immigration attorneys representing individuals on immigration issues in the United States and other. For more information, go to imwong.com. That's imwong.com. And I did not read any questions on the air this evening from our listeners. I apologize for that. Please bear with me, and we'll hope to do better the next time. Lastly, I'd like to thank my producer, Errol Porter, for producing tonight's broadcast, and the rest of the staff here at voiceitradio.com. And so until next time, be kind and respectful to one another, because after all, we're all we have. This is David Delgado. We are going global. Good night. Andy, good night.
Thank you.